The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the ASPPH Presents webinar series. My name is Liz Weist, Director of Education at the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. This webinar is geared to faculty who want to up your game by playing games. We're pleased to present Reacting to the Past, an innovative simulation game approach for learning that will last 1 hour, and this webinar will be archived for later viewing. We encourage you, we want you to know first that all of your lines are muted to enable you to hear the speakers, but we encourage your submission of comments or questions anytime. You'll see that in the side of your screen that there is a box. Go ahead and where you see the arrow, type in your question or comment at any time. Learning objectives, we have 3 that we hope to accomplish by the time we finish this webinar, that you will be able to describe how to use the teaching method Reacting to the Past, RTTP for short, that you will be able to depict one example at least of using RTTP in a public health setting. And lastly, that you can outline general student learning outcomes from RTTP approaches to learning. I'd like to add also that we are offering 1 hour of certified in public health continuing education credits for this webinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, and we have 3, and they will be going in the sequence here. We have Dr. Rachel Schwartz from the Georgia Southern University Jean Pingsou College of Public Health, and Dr. Schwartz is an early adopter of the Reacting to the Past model and has used it very successfully in her public health teaching, so that's her goal today. Next on the program, we have Dr. Naomi Norman from the University of Georgia, who is one of the big national champions of RTTP, and she is joined also by her colleague, Dr. Chase Haygood, who is with her also at the University of Georgia and a fellow national champion and devotee of RTTP. So please join me in welcoming these 3 presenters. We are going to start off with Dr. Schwartz giving an intro to RTTP, and then Drs. Norman and Haygood getting into a little depth of the body, the global picture, and with a lot of how-tos and examples. Dr. Schwartz will come back on board with a particular example, the Broad Street Pump, and then we will take the end of the webinar. We're looking at 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A conversation as you see fit, as you wish. And then we'll adjourn promptly after 1 hour. So without further ado, Dr. Schwartz, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Liz. Public health education is faced with a serious challenge. A recent report in Inside Higher Education tells us that while students think that they're graduating ready to go to work, they're in fact not ready. When they leave the university, apparently, research from multiple public health organizations tells us that they simply don't have the competencies and skills they need. So from APHA, ASTO, CEF, and employers of our graduate students, they're looking for crucial skills and competencies. All of this, despite the fact that CEF, our accrediting body, has developed a comprehensive and cross-cutting set of competencies and learning outcomes for our programs. Among the competencies most often mentioned as lacking by our employers are collaborative skills, such as teamwork and the ability to communicate with a variety of audiences or stakeholders. Public speaking has also been problematic. We've all seen that writing could use some improvement. Add to that crucial cross-cutting competencies like critical thinking and problem solving, and we have some serious teaching to do. So how can we work toward closing that gap? Part of our problem is clearly laid out in the pedagogical research. The traditional teaching approach we know so well, lectures and PowerPoints with quizzes, papers, and exams, is not always ideal for competency-based learning, at least when it's our primary approach. We need to focus more on active learning, hands-on applications to get material across in a way that prepares students for public health work, especially in the more practice-based fields. Faced with these deficits in my own graduate and undergraduate courses, I tried a range of more or less successful methods. I hoped to convey not only content, but application, understanding of ethics and policy, use of data, and a critical approach to evidence. We did case studies and held debates. I required evidence-based reports, presentations, and research, and yet these methods lacked coherence. They felt like drive-by interventions, if you will. 3 years ago, I was introduced to Thomas Chase Haygood and Naomi Norman, and the reacting to the past methodology or approach. It's a sophisticated, immersive role-play approach that addresses content and competencies on the deepest levels. In fact, as I discovered, these games can be adjusted to address a majority, if not all, of CEIF competencies and build skills while preparing students for real-life public health experiences. At this point, I'll hand over to Chase and Naomi, and they'll take a more in-depth look at the reacting game itself.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you, Liz. We are definitely excited to chat with you all today about reacting, to jump in a little bit deeper in terms of what this looks like at the national level, and where, in fact, reacting to the past as a pedagogy comes from. What can it offer students? What can it offer faculty? So we'll begin with a quick overview, one that would take a look at what is reacting. It is, in terms of, and as Rachel's pointed out, it is in many ways, we view it as the most active of active learning, high impact pedagogies as defined by organizations like AAC&U and others. In many ways, if you think about the context in which it can reside or be implemented, we have seen it used, and it is currently used in active learning classrooms and classes with inverted or flipped instructional styles, from intro level courses, say in the first year experience, all the way through upper level courses in undergraduate education, and is now being entertained both in the K-12 area as well as in the professional or graduate areas. And I say entertained because the pedagogy is innovative in its use. It's also attractive in many ways for a lot of faculty who experience it once and then begin typically to ask one of two questions. They'll either say, oh, this is so exciting, what game can I write? And or they'll say, how can I use this game in whatever course that they might be teaching currently or upcoming? There is pretty strong, as you see listed here, evidence base, and that evidence base is growing behind reacting. The leader of our movement, the mind behind reacting to the past, was Mark Carnes, or is Mark Carnes, professor of history at Barnard College at Columbia University. Mark's a late 19th, early 20th century historian. And the origin of reacting goes something like this. Mark was teaching a first-year experience course in the mid-1990s at Barnard College with some incredibly talented and skilled students, the young women of Barnard. And Mark found that the students, he would show up with a reading for these students to entertain, a critical text. And the students, although Mark was quite excited because he had lost count of how many times he had read the text, the students weren't as excited. The students kind of, they were able to answer a couple of cursory questions, but then as he wanted to dive deeper into the text, the students seemed to lose interest. And so Mark thought there has to be a better way. There has to be something else that we could do to get students engaged. And it was out of that initial, what else could we do, that reacting was born. Since then, as you see here, Mark has told that story quite well in a Harvard Press Minds on Fire 2014. Most recently, Playing to Learn with Reacting to the Past, my colleague who's now at AAC&U, Eddie Watson, and I edited a volume, a collection of studies across institution types and purpose and size, public and private. And we took a look at the ways in which the games work, both in terms of student learning outcomes as well as faculty efficacy. One of the earlier studies that did that kind of work that's not included in the volume, but is in the Journal of Educational Psychology, was the Stroessner, Beckerman, and Whitaker study, taking a look at the psychological factors of using this game. I'd encourage you to take a look at any of those and the literature base that continues to grow around reacting. So again, the premise, I guess, as Mark was beginning to think through reacting, and now it has grown into a national movement, was looking to faculty and looking out to students, thinking about effective learning environments and how is it that we construct these kind of significant learning environments in which students are engaged. And you see there on the left, as we kind of, it's our nod toward the more traditional lecture where one student looks somewhat engaged, but perhaps forced to be engaged if she is going to learn, and others are quite disengaged, one of them including on her mobile phone. As opposed to the image you see on the right, in which students have begun to own their learning and have begun to, in many ways, take the learning even outside the traditional classroom space. A couple of key features that we'll go through here, that reacting, it certainly consists of elaborate games that sit at a nexus of a decision point in the past, where key texts inform students as to how they craft their arguments, how they engage with big ideas. As they exist in assigned roles, they would leave their 21st century selves and they would jump into a historic role, writing and debating important points and ideas as the characters they inhabit inside the game. So in the class time, that is traditionally lectures, again, you see there on the left, students begin, as a student-centered classroom would have them, they begin guiding the conversation, they begin guiding their own learning, while instructors advise, guide, and grade. So instructors aren't completely written out, but they are positioned in a very different way than perhaps a traditional pedagogy. In doing so, students would then move from being passive consumers to active users and producers of knowledge. So back to Mark's original kind of challenge, and one that many of us have faced in our teaching careers, what do we do when students don't engage text or assignments or ideas the way that we would hope that they might, the way that we as specialists and experts in our area certainly do? What do we do with those students when that doesn't come off? Reacting situates the student in a place in which she must do something with the ideas inside this game environment. So what do games look like? All games, well, there are primarily two paths. First, we'll talk about games that are published, and then we'll talk about games that are currently unpublished. Published games, they are either published through W.W. Norton Press, or they're published through a Reacting Consortium imprint through the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Press. Games, again, built around a critical moment in the past, let's say the French Revolution, or defining what democracy will be in ancient Athens. Well, what does it look like? What, in many ways, which way will society move? Will it defend the status quo in a more small c conservative way? Or will it take a progressive approach and change things for the better? Or representing that broad middle of society, will things some things change and some things stay the same? Students are assigned roles in those factions, and in those factions they begin to drive learning forward in the classroom. So as part of a standard issue for game materials, the instructor would get an instructor's manual behind a firewall, and a firewall is necessary because students become so engaged they want to see the secrets behind the game. So the instructor would get that as a PDF that you would download through reacting.barnard.edu. In that instructor's manual, there would be game mechanics. What switches do I turn off or turn on in this remarkably flexible pedagogy? How do I make the game work in the ways that I want it to work for my specific classroom and for the learners that I'm charged with? The how-tos, how to make a game run, how to meet certain issues that might arise, so kind of anticipating things that may or may not go right or perhaps go wrong over the course of the game in which you learn from previous game plays, and then the role descriptions. So having the roles that you would hand students that aren't in many ways prescriptive. They aren't telling students where they're going to end up in the game, but they let students know a general introduction as to who their character is. Also, for the game materials, there would be primary texts. They would be, in some ways, loosely defined. These would be key texts that any person at the time might be aware of, and you want the students as characters in the French Revolution, or perhaps in London in 1854, that Rachel will chat with us more about in a moment. What's going on at the time in terms of society and culture, politics, economics? What are key texts that help inform the student? Texts that many of us would assign in a traditional format, but students now have to do something with those texts in the game. The student would also, so that's the instructor side, the student would also pick up a game book. You could order it on Amazon, you could have it supplied by your university bookstore, and in that game book, they would get a primer of historical context, the game premise, what's going on to me as a learner, you know, what are the expectations the faculty member and my peers have of me and my faction? What are the central debates to be covered over the course of the game? And some games run from 2 days, others run up to 4 weeks, others could extend on out. We can chat more about that perhaps in a moment. And the rules of gameplay. So what are the parameters? What are the things that are acceptable and the things that are not acceptable in terms of the game? And a lot of faculty, again, there may be a spectrum of what one faculty member finds to be acceptable, another faculty member might not. So it's on the faculty member to help the students understand the rules of gameplay. There are a number of online resources. I won't go through all of those, but you see the list there. Suffice it to say that there is a robust online national community of faculty across almost all disciplines having engaged in either playing games, writing games, thinking about how we assess the work of these games in terms of educational research. And that community is well connected. You can find them on social media via Facebook, the Twitter page, and as you'll see in a moment, there's a pretty active YouTube channel that you can share information about reacting as well. Our students there, those students here at the University of Georgia, they were
unmuted.
A game that Rachel's going to tell us more about in a moment, the cholera game in London, 1854. It's important to note, and I said earlier, Naomi and I are both trained through the humanities. Mark is a historian. It's important to know that though born out of a humanities tradition, one that I would argue has a very strong kind of inverted or flipped approach for the last, I don't know, 200, 300 years. You know, student, go read this text, come in, and we'll talk about it. It's an inverted approach. Born out of the humanities, though, reacting didn't stay within the humanities, and I think that's quite important to note here, especially for our colleagues in public health and other STEM fields. Thinking beyond history in terms of as culture as a bridge and off into the STEM fields, you see a number of games written there. I believe it was the late 90s or early 2000s that an NSF grant was written and was successful to begin exploring writing reacting games, and they're typically shorter in the STEM fields for various reasons, but you see a number of those there that have been developed so that our students in STEM classrooms can also experience the power of reacting's pedagogy, and then again from first year experiences all the way through courses and programs of study or in majors. I would say here that there are these two paths, one of published games, and there's also those of unpublished games, and there are a number of unpublished games that are currently in development. So you see that listed there, and there is a large list. If you go to Barnard or reacting.barnard.edu, you can see a number of games that are currently in development, and there's levels of those games. I won't dive too deeply into that, but any level 3 or above game is ready to be played or could be used in a classroom, even if it hasn't been published yet. And you would get a number of those materials simply by being in touch with Reacting Central there at Barnard College. With that, we have often found that it is best if faculty who are being first exposed to reacting are able to hear from the students themselves. So we thought we would take a few moments here to let you see students in action and hear how they describe their experience with reacting to the past.
By now we're in 1948. India is in the eve of independence. The British are pulling out. India is intensely divided. We had a mutiny, and then the communists tried to stage a few uprisings, so there's a lot up in the air.
I think when people think of history, they kind of have this stereotypical idea that it's sitting and reading a textbook and just reading facts and dates, whereas getting out into the past, you're acting out history.
I am Dr. Ambedkar. I'm the leader of the depressed class.
My role in this game is the Nizam of Hyderabad.
I'm the president of the Congress Party.
I'm Nehru.
Reacting to the past is a really fantastic and unique experience. It looks at history in a whole new way. You're not sitting there listening to a teacher lecture. You're not sitting there taking notes.
It's not just memorizing dates and memorizing principles. You're embodying this character that you normally would just be reading in a textbook.
Really throws you into the time period.
It's unlike any other class I've ever taken. It doesn't feel like school.
We walk into class talking, friendly. You sit down. It's go time.
You forget that you're not actually in India in 1946.
Everyone kind of wants to win at all costs.
You have to do whatever it takes.
Beginning of the game, all the characters are thrown into this conference at Simla.
The purpose of us all meeting is so that we can talk to the Governors General and say, this is what we want to happen in India, and this is what we're hoping you can do for us.
I really came in knowing nothing about India other than that it was a British colony.
I didn't know anything about it, all the debates, the partitioning, the characters.
I really didn't know what to expect.
The INC operates on a pragmatic level. We are striving and have been striving for a unified India since its conception.
I will tell you something, INC. There is one way in which the minority groups are united. We do not want to be Hindu.
Preparing for the role is sort of study for exam. You want to know as much as possible, and you want to have read and have research on it.
That's why you learn history so well in reacting. You have to go out and really do your homework. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed.
And it makes you want to work outside of class and just invest as much time as possible in it.
I never really lose interest in what's going on because it's so compelling all the time. I'm never stressed in this class, but I'm always having fun.
It's a wonderful, terrifying kind of investment that you find yourself having.
They teach you how to build coalitions, how to work with people of competing ideologies, leadership skills, public speaking. You have to understand things from all points of view. It's skills that you can really take with you in life.
I think reacting to the past is more engaging than any other class I've taken because of the way that it puts the student in control. You can feel empowered and feel like you're making a difference.
You really not only get to know the history better, but you get to know these people so much better than any other class I've taken. I made, I think, my closest friends through this class. Finally got rid of the Governors General, which is very exciting. There's no more British in India. So now we need a new leader of this new Indian Union. There's going to be speeches, and then we're going to take a vote.
The Indian National Congress is here to finally put an end to the thought that this will be a government of intolerant minority groups.
With us in place, I can promise you that you will be secure from the misconduct of any extremist Hindu neighbors. Please bear that in mind when voting today and show your support to the resolution. Thank you.
One thing this class has taught me is that it's very hard to learn history in retrospect. You really have to put yourself in the shoes of the people at that exact moment of history.
You get really passionate about a topic that you never would have thought you would care about before.
Now, like maybe when an event happens in India, I'll read it online or in the newspaper because I do have a connection now to it.
10 years from now, I'll probably remember more from this class than I will from half the other big lecture classes I've taken.
I mean, I'm not a history person, but I still love it. And I think it can really be an amazing experience for anyone.
So one of the things I think that we could take from that video, two things actually. One where a student says, I think I've learned more from this and I'll be able to use more that I've learned from a reacting classroom than from any other class I've taken. And the second piece, I don't think this is about history. I think it's about many of the things that we're here chatting about today, and that's about skills and competencies. And when a student is able to say, the second student in this clip, is able to say, what matters to me is not that, I'm not a history major, but I think that very much is kind of what we're all looking for in our classrooms, right? Especially within general education, I would say even beyond. If the student isn't interested in becoming a specialist in a particular field, yet she is willing to say, maybe this isn't going to be my major, but at some point in the future, I'm going to be able to use the skills that I picked up here and the information I picked up here and apply it and use it as a filter as I make my way, through life. So with that, I will hand it over to Naomi.
Okay, so as Chase mentioned, or as you saw in the video, students are wildly enthusiastic about the pedagogy. They routinely praise the experience, often end up saying it's the most wonderful class that they've taken. But it's lovely anecdotes, but at this point it's primarily anecdotal. So the volume that Chase mentioned at the very beginning, the one that he co-edited with Eddie Watson, was the first kind of comprehensive study of the effectiveness of the pedagogy. And one of the chapters in that book, Chase and I co-authored, and it was an attempt to put together a national survey to collect data both from students who had experience reacting to the past and faculty who had used the pedagogy to get some kind of handle around what was effective and why it was so engaging, why it was met with such enthusiasm on both sides of the desk. So we put together this national survey, and over there on the left, you can see the kinds of questions that we asked of students. Typical demographic questions, their learning experience, behaviors, relation to faculty, so forth and so on. And over here on the right, we had a lot of really amazing results. I think these are some of the more important ones that really speak to the development of skills and competencies that I think all of us want our students to exit class and exit college with. So a better understanding of research methodology, reading beyond the assigned material. What you find often happens in a reacting class is a student will come up to you as the professor and say, I'd like to do X, Y, and Z. Can I do that? To which the appropriate answer in reacting is, I don't know. But here are some sources you might want to look at, do some research, and come back and convince me that, in fact, you can do that. And although I routinely give students more material to read, they almost never do it unless they're in a reacting class. They will actually go out and do that material. Their interest is sparked. And from my thinking, curiosity is one of those things that mark a student who's going to become a lifelong learner, as opposed to somebody who learns in the classroom and then they're kind of, one and done. So these students become curious, they research more material. They actually actively use, material from the homework in their class performance. You cannot stand up and deliver an effective speech if you haven't read the primary source material. They understand concepts and ideas more deeply. 83% of them said that they read their assigned material with greater attention to detail, which made them more able to engage in critical thinking. So it's very clear from the research that students feel a high level of degree of confidence that reacting is actually helping them learn the material. Here are some of the more sort of interesting and excited quotations that students provided on open-ended questions. It was easier to put myself out there, actively ask questions, and seek help. Reacting challenged me to take control of my learning. These are lifelong learning skills that we want our students to have. I'm much more conscious of the value of giving students more control and choice in the classroom. One of the things we also found in a lot of the answers that came back from students is they were actually transferring skills from reacting courses into non-reacting courses. So their ability to sort of read with attention to detail, they transferred from one class to another class. Their ability to stand up and speak, ask questions, and actually master the material, they started to transfer from one class to the other. So not only did we look at faculty, but we, at students, but we also looked at faculty. In all of the sort of responses that we got from students, it seemed as if social cohesion was one of the things that really helped hold a reacting classroom together. It was, something that allowed students to cut across their clique boundaries. They would come into class, and although Susie was best friends with Sally, they found themselves in different factions, and they made new connections in class. And as they mentioned in the video, they stay in close contact with one another well after class ends. So you'll see here that we asked pretty much the same set of questions of faculty that we asked of students, because we wanted a certain amount of parallelism between the two groups. And over here on the right, results from faculty that really mirror in large extent what students told us about their experience of being in a reacting classroom and the kinds of skills that they developed. Reading material with greater attention to detail, retaining content longer, faculty not worrying so much about content coverage because students were acquiring skills and competencies that they could then use themselves with new content. Engaging in critical thinking, and just as students were transferring reacting skills into a non-reacting classroom, faculty overwhelmingly reported that they were transferring reacting pedagogy into their non-reacting classrooms. One of the results that we found most interesting was 80% of students report greater understanding of faculty roles as researcher and scholar. So again, it's a sort of interesting glue that holds students together and holds students together with faculty. There's a greater understanding on the part of students of what the faculty role actually is. So here are some of the interesting quotations that we got from faculty. I see teaching completely immersively now. And you'll notice here that this particular instructor is transferring that kind of level of engagement from a reacting classroom into another reacting classroom. It changes the relationship between faculty and students. This particular faculty member trusts his students more, and he's willing to take more risks in the classroom because of his experience with success in a reacting classroom. This next quote I find particularly interesting. I think about scholarship differently now. And a number of faculty reported to us that they actually came up with new avenues of research as a result of teaching in a reacting classroom. When a student would come up and pose one of those questions, can I do X, Y, and Z? And the faculty member didn't actually know the answer and discovered a new avenue of research. So it's an amazing pedagogy for reinvigorating not only classroom instruction, but also reinvigorating the life of individual teachers and scholars. So we found that one of the things that sort of seems to hold the classroom together on the part of students, it's very much social cohesion. On the part of faculty, it's really kind of relationship-driven teaching. We know that reacting students and faculty report that they stay in touch with each other and know each other much better long after the classroom actually ends. And this kind of relationship building is something which abundant research tells us that this high degree of engagement leads to better teaching and also leads to better learning. So thank you. We're going to turn the presentation over to Rachel. We'll have questions at the end, and Rachel can talk in more detail about the cholera game.
And this is Liz real quick from ASPPH. Go ahead and submit your comments or questions into the box, and we will take those. I already see there's one there, but we'll come back to you after Dr. Schwartz.
Okay, hi again. So, based on what you've just heard, you can probably imagine how reacting might improve some foundational public health skills and competencies in an engaging and memorable way. But I'd like to take a closer look at one of the games that we probably would relate very closely to public health, just to see how that might work up close. And as Chase and Naomi mentioned, we're going to look at London, 1854, cesspits, cholera, and conflict at the Broad Street Pump. And you're immediately clicking to John Snow, the classic case of public health. This one was developed by two faculty members from Cornell, Marshall Hayes and Eric Nelson. And as reacting games go, it's one of those relatively short ones. You can probably pull it off in 2 classes, but I prefer to use 3 because then there's more preparation time and we also have more debriefing time. The game can be pitched toward undergraduate or graduate students. It really depends on the kind of assignments and the depth of your assignments, your expectations. It's suitable for a course in any field of public health. There's a lot of wiggle room in these courses, and you can focus on a particular part of it that interests you. So in this game, students are placed at a crucial juncture in public health history. The Emergency Response Committee meeting of the local Board of Governors and Directors of the Poor of St. James Parish, London, in 1854. They will discuss the cholera deaths of over 500 parish residents in the last 8 days, and they will debate what steps to take to prevent more deaths. The debate is carried out in character, and as you saw in some of Chase and Naomi's footage, some students get all dressed up in costumes, and it focuses on the 3 central questions that were actually debated in 1854. What is the source of the outbreak? How is cholera transmitted? And what steps should be taken to control the outbreak? Questions that should sound familiar to anybody in public health, and that we want our students to be able to generate and address. Historically, as we know, the meeting's outcome resulted in the removal of the Broad Street Pump handle based on the argument that cholera was a contagious disease. In other words, Snow won the day. However, the outcome of the game in your class may be different. It's influenced not so much by the history as it happened, but by how effectively the students apply their skills, how their research works, and how competent they are in various public health skills. To win the game, the students must convince the Board of Governors to choose their faction's solution to the problem. And board members are also students, many of whom have their own biases, some of which have nothing to do with the health of the people. And this shouldn't be news to us, right? There's some real lessons to be drawn for the present. Each student is placed in one of 3 factions: the contagionists, that would be John Snow and his group, the non-contagionists, and those people were miasma-based, and then there's an indeterminate group, those who don't necessarily hold with either approach, but who may be convinced to back a side by social, financial, or political pressures or inducements. All historically accurate. Again, this is a historical game, so we're not pulling stuff out of thin air. In their individual packets, each student receives a gold mine of historical political, epidemiological, and community information materials to help them mount their arguments. Included in their materials are official copies of leaflets distributed at the time, historical and current materials on epidemics, links to websites on John Snow, various medical journals, and archives going back to this period. Also, two vital data points are Snow's original map of cholera mortalities in St. James Parish and a competing theorist in public health, William Farr's correlation of elevation and cholera mortalities. In addition, students have access to a visualization tool that allows them to manipulate morbidity and mortality data for the rest of London. And they also have access to the daily cumulative mortality returns for the relevant time and place. This allows them to create data plots to define the origins of the outbreak. So they're really working through the process, the epidemiological process here. They have everything we need for an all-out systems approach with input from all fields of public health. Students work in their factions to strategize, do in-depth research, assess needs, epidemiological realities, and write broadsides, position papers, articles, and speeches, which, as you saw, they deliver in often raucous debate. At one point in this game, you might find Thomas Pratt, a great proponent of homeopathy, arguing with Thomas Smith, a supporter of Snow's contagion theory, and John Stevens, who believes that cholera is related to meteorological conditions and secretly wants to see a permanent system of weather balloons deployed across the parish. You can't make this stuff up. The game ends with the board's vote. We follow up with a conversation of how events played out historically, and we compare our results. Finally, we look at lessons learned and applied in 1854 and how they still apply today. So what competencies have we addressed here? Our students have practiced an evidence-based approach to public health research, researching the unique issues of the 19th century and the public health care system as it developed from that period. They've used a systems thinking approach to plan strategies to manage and promote health. They've created and proposed policy and have been placed in a variety of leadership roles. They've had to communicate through multiple media with professionals from other fields, and all of this, if you remember Chase and Nomi's data, while learning on the deepest level, gaining confidence in their knowledge, and having a good time.
Great, thanks to all three of you. Back again to Liz at ASPPH here. And we are sitting here listening, and my colleagues and I wish that, we wish that we had these opportunities when we were coming up. Here are a couple questions so far, and the rest of you, please go ahead and put in comments or questions into the box. First one, can any of these games be played in an online class, or are they only possible in live classes? And since we have our three speakers up, could you just put your finger up if you'd like to answer, and the others can see which one's taken on the response. All right.
So that's a really great question, and it's a question that Naomi and I get when we chat with faculty across the Southeast and nationally in a number of different conferences. I think part of the question is pushing us forward as a community of practitioners to think about the ways in which the games can be used online. There are a number of folks, I think we have faculty friends over at Troy State University in South Alabama who have been attempting to see how this can work using things like Google Hangouts and posting documents and having students interact on learning management systems. The answer is not no. The answer is people are seeking to be able to figure out innovative ways to use reacting in the online environment. And we welcome folks to continue to ask those questions and to help us as a community explore how we do that.
Great. Sky's the limit, sounds like. Next one. This is a great approach. Thank you for the introduction and for discussing the connection, especially with the CEPH competencies. what other public health games are available. I did a quick search of the Barnard site and I didn't see many.
I'll just say I actually originally had a list of them, but Naomi and Chase had a list up in their PowerPoint of games that are actually excellent public health games. And one of the ones that I particularly like was the Rwanda game, which is a very nice, do you have that here?
No, it's not on the list.
Okay, Rwanda is just a great game that I'm going to use in my global health course because it really talks about what is the reason and the responsibility, the ethical responsibilities that we have to help people in other countries. And it really plays in very nicely with global health, with ethics, and with just about anything you can imagine in public health. But as you can see, the USDA food pyramid, also known as the food fight, is there, and it's a fabulous and fun and really up-to-date game that can get you into some very interesting conversations about things like the current status of recommendations for the kind of food we eat, the whole argument of the discussion of how sugars and fats, fats were considered bad, sugars were not considered bad, all of that stuff, helping people to understand how things, especially in a policy way, how things got to be the way they were in the USDA. And the climate change game, I mean, I don't think I have to say more. I would guess since that was done in 2009, you would want to update it with your own information as well. And as I said before, there's really wiggle room in these games. So there's more, as you can see on this list. And there are other games, especially if you're looking at advocacy games. I know some people play the red clay game, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, guys. What
it's Cherokee removal.
Right, Cherokee removal. So that's a really nice public health game if you're trying to, it sounds funny to say game when you're talking about something so serious, but if you want to understand vulnerable populations and the roots of vulnerable populations. I hope that helps.
Very thorough, Dr. Schwartz. And the next question's for you too. You had mentioned that you could do that one game in 2 or 3 classes. How many hours are you talking?
I would say that you could do it in, it would have to be, let's say, an hour, 15 minutes per class. And I really do prefer to do it in 3 classes, though it can be done in 2 and in a pinch. Maybe Chase could pull it off. Maybe Naomi could pull it off in 1.
Well, okay, so at the minimum, an hour and 15 minutes. You could do it pretty nicely in 2.5, but you could also make it 3 hours, 45 minutes, the example you were giving. Excellent. Now, next question. Since this is not a way that students are typically used to learning, are there preparatory steps that should be taken in terms of building skills before launching the game experience? Who wants to take that one?
So I'll take that one. There are several ways that you can approach that. And again, if you go back in the presentation, once it's recorded, and look at that Facebook faculty lounge where practitioners share a lot of tools of the trade and tips of the road. Some people use a kind of warm-up exercise just to get students more comfortable with the idea of speaking in front of a large class. There are a series of videos up on the Reacting YouTube channel that also talk to students who might have fear of public speaking about how to craft a speech and how to get over your natural fear of talking in front of others, especially when you're presenting somebody else's ideas as opposed to your own. I find that the setup game or the setup sessions are really, really important to sort of let students understand what they're going to be experiencing. And I have found that the single best thing that I tell students before they start playing a game is you are going to be confused on the first day, But after the first day, you will find your feet and you will figure out exactly how this runs. And that's one of the reasons why we encourage faculty to go to a workshop and play a game themselves in a one-day venue, just so that we can remind ourselves of what it feels like to be on the other side of the desk, not really knowing what's going on and what to expect.
Great advice to learn by doing. Here are a few more questions. We heard you say this game was appropriate for graduate and undergraduate students, but they're wondering, is it appropriate for high school students? Could it be adapted?
Yes, absolutely. Again, it's just a question of you're figuring out what your requirements are going to be. So perhaps they would have a different level of expectation in terms of papers, or perhaps you would cut down the readings a little bit, or not expect them to use some of the more sophisticated tools. Though I would say if you gave them John Snow's cholera map, it would be pretty easy for them to look at it and to understand something. So yes, by all means, why not high school?
Great. And what size group is optimal for the games? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it. So they're very, very flexible. Here at the University of Georgia, we have run games with as few as 10 students up to 120 students. So of course you use different kind of, classroom management systems, depending upon how many students you have. But you can almost always figure out a way to accommodate the number of students you have in your class with one of these games. Optimally, most of the games are designed for about 20 students.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Norman. And Dr. Higa, you are starting to, anything to add? Or?
No, I think, I would add just this one caveat. I think what is the challenge, right, as you scale up from, Naomi's quite right, the intentional earliest designs were around what were first-year experiences in undergraduate education, so 15 to 20 students. Games have, as the pedagogy has evolved, games have kept pace with, and game authors have kept pace with understanding the widespread adoption of the pedagogy. And so you've begun to see games designed in the last 5 years with additional roles added in, so the game can kind of pull out and you could see it play for 30 students, or you could, in the instructor's manual, you can see that the author advises you on if you only have 13 students, if you have 20 students, if you have 40 students, this is how you can make the game work for you. And then the ingenuity of faculty who are researchers, who are passionate about teaching. If you have experienced the pedagogy, you sense and see its transformative impacts, you will be compelled to try to figure out ways to make the game work for 60 students, all the way up to Naomi and I had the pleasure of working with a faculty member in epidemiology to roll it out for a student, a classroom of 120 students. So things, I won't say that all things are possible, but many things are possible with reacting to the past.
Excellent. I think techies would call that game modding. Lots of flexibility. And here is the second to last question in the box. How do you assign roles for students?
I can handle it quickly, I think, which may not be my nature, but I will try to do it very quickly. There's a wide spectrum of how faculty choose to do this. Some faculty will assign roles completely at random. They'll draw names out of a hat. Sometimes it's even built or out of an urn. It's built in perhaps to the game dynamic and the historical moment. So sometimes completely at random. On the other end of that continuum, you'd have faculty who want to be very intentional with the students that they have in front of them, and perhaps they've gotten to know them. Depending on where the game is situated in the semester, perhaps you've come to know your students in the 6th week more than you did in the 2nd week. And so knowing which student might tend toward being more introverted, a student who perhaps is working 2 part-time jobs and has a family that they are caring for, students who are commuters versus those who are living in rest. All of those things might then frame the faculty member on the other end of the continuum who wants to make more targeted kind of assignments. If you play 2 games, you might have students in leadership roles in the first game, and then you share the wealth with the students who weren't in leadership roles in the second game.
Very helpful. Again, a lot of flexibility. And the last question, any cautionary tales of ways this could go south that we should try to avoid?
I'm sure we all have stories.
You know, I would just say that as you progress in your reacting experience, you learn that these are teaching opportunities. And since this is really a student-based pedagogy, mistakes, problems, generally they tend to work themselves out, and the students learn from them. You can always step in from the side with a little note or a suggestion, but that doesn't have to happen very often. Once the students know it's their game and their class, they're generally really good handling it.
And to that, I would just add one thing, that I think the hardest thing for faculty to get used to is the fact that it is student-centered and student-driven. And you shouldn't be there intruding on the way they want the game to play out. I find it hard to sort of step back, and I think a lot of faculty share that with me. So that's the one cautionary tale I would tell. Don't be afraid to sit in the back of the room.
To those incredible points, I would say, I think that it requires, to that challenge of faculty, as well as when things might not go the way one had planned in the learning environment, I think it's not only an opportunity for students to learn. I think what reacting requires, it requires faculty to start seeing the teaching and learning dynamic in a different kind of way, in which we begin opening up ourselves a little to learning even more from our students, being a little bit more vulnerable with things that we don't know, with things that students can teach us. And it's exciting in a myriad of ways, right? Where students may share things with us that we had never considered in our research and any of our previous learning experiences. But it's also exciting because they have things to share with us that, you know, they bring a very different perspective, at least than, you know, when I was an undergraduate student. They have things to share that are quite different and quite enlightening.
Sounds like that letting go has its rewards if you're willing to step off the cliff a little bit. And, you know, we see that students today are really interested in authentic learning experiences. And I like how you said earlier, it's really moving from a passive consumption of learning to the active acquisition where the student is more a driver. And that's not easy for faculty. So I commend you all in what you've done, and we're really grateful at ASPPH that you're willing, and thank you especially Dr. Schwartz for bringing this really interesting pedagogy to our attention, and for all of you for joining us today. I want to thank all our presenters, Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Norman, Dr. Haygood, for your time today. And again, we will be posting this archive webinar right on our website, right where you signed up to register. It's all going to be there for viewing and also for sending to your colleagues. It would be wonderful to keep sharing this kind of pedagogy and to see more of it being done and practiced and improved upon and spread throughout schools and programs of public health and with our partnering institutions. We'd like to also let you know about some upcoming webinars in the ASPPH Present series. We have 3 on the docket right now, one on opioid litigation in June, and then a little later at the end of the month in June, a spotlight on holistic admissions in student services. And then in August, we have a policy advocacy webinar on the mission of academic public health. We invite you to join us. All are free and they all last 1 hour, and all will receive CPH, continuing education credits. Again, thank you very much for our presenters, and you've all been a great audience. The webinar is now concluded.
Thank you.